Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us today. My name is Jean. I'm going to be your host for this hour. Now, today's session is the first of a three-part Women in Business series. So, our speakers are going to share the various aspects of diversity and actionable steps to cultivate inclusivity, particularly for women in corporate leadership and STEM fields. Okay, but first, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Firstly, we have Dylan Choong, Head of People AMEA at Opella, the consumer healthcare unit of Sanofi. Now, Dylan is a seasoned people strategist with over 2 decades of multi sectoral HR experience, specializing in organizational transformation and effectiveness and talent management and leadership development as well. Now, Dylan's previously held key roles at WPP, Adidas, Sephora, Starwood as well, where he focused on people strategies that drive growth and enhance organizational culture. Is also a strong advocate for equity, inclusion, life balance, and has been recognized as a game changer by Workforce. All right, very nice to have you here with us, Dylan.
Thank you for having me.
Next, yeah, and next we have Shoon Lim, Global Head of DEI Capability at Russell Reynolds Associates. Now, Shoon partners clients to support the development and growth of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DE and I) as a key proposition for business performance globally, with deep expertise in Asia Pacific. She previously served as Global DE and I Manager at Javalden and held roles at Shell and Microsoft. Shun is passionate about enabling people, leaders, and organizations to realize their full potential, is committed to fostering inclusive and equitable leadership as well. So thanks very much for joining us today, Shun.
Thank you.
And the last speaker of our panel is Dr. Ming Tan, founder, executive director for Tech for Good Institute, also council member of Council for Board of Diversity. Now, Tech for Good Institute is a nonprofit seed funded by Grab to catalyze research and collaboration on social, economic, and policy trends accelerated by the digital economy in Southeast Asia. Now, she's also senior fellow at the Center for Governance and Sustainability at the National University of Singapore and advisor to the founder of the Como Group. Now, Ming's research interests lie at the intersection of technology, business, and society, including sustainability and innovation. So, thank you all for being here today. Before we dive in, shall we do a quick poll just to understand our audience a little bit better? There will be a poll that's flashed up on the screen. Um, Here we are. What's your current role in your organization? So if you could do a little tick over there, we'll be able to understand and see who we have here today. Yeah, we'll just take a few minutes, sorry, a few seconds to do this. Board members or directors? Do we have executive leadership, mid level management, entry level, student or recent graduate, or others? So, once again, I think, okay, let's see what we've got. Mid level management coming in at 59%. We also have others at 13, entry level at 13, executive leadership and student at 7%, and board members and directors at 2%. All right. That's very nice to know. Okay. All right, panel. I think shall we begin? I think we should. By the way, at any point, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to use the Q&A feature and we will try to get them in towards the end of this hour. Okay, so let's start with corporate organizational level. Like, why is it important to foster inclusivity beyond gender inclusivity? I'm not sure who wants to take this, but maybe Ming wants to take this one.
Sure. Thank you, Jean, and thank you everybody for the questions that have been coming in. And I'm really honored to be here today. And thank you for Mediacorp for organizing this great event. From my perspective, inclusivity means having more people in the room and around the table who basically think differently from one another. It's not how we look like, it's how we're thinking. We need many eyes, many ears, many points of view because the pace of change is not slowing down. So, Jean, let's take geopolitical, technical, social, environmental levels as an example. All of this just demonstrates how fast things change. Geopolitically, maybe we could track the rise of China as a superpower, but then the conflict in Ukraine and the Hamas attack on Israel came as a total surprise, and businesses, organizations, governments had to pivot their response. Technologically, of course, we know everything that Gen AI is transforming politics, transforming industries, transforming our daily life. Yeah. Socially, we're still trying to figure out how to work post-pandemic. And then you've got things like youth-led activism that are just redefining cultural norms and social societal structures. And then environmentally, we're thinking about climate-induced disasters. What does it mean for risk? What does it mean for preparedness? What does it mean for our future strategies? So some people call this VUCA. So I don't know if you've heard this word: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, VUCA. So what's the response, right, for businesses or governments, or if you're in a nonprofit sector? Volatile, that's really rapid fluctuations. You need to be super agile. In the face of uncertainty, that's the U, is because you have incomplete information. When you have incomplete information, you have to try to get inputs as widely as possible. C, complex. The complexity of our context, our operating context, means that we need systems thinking, which means that we need to really think about all the stakeholders, even our traditional stakeholders, but our non-traditional stakeholders as well. So you need many people around the table to kind of say, well, what about so-and-so? What about this stakeholder that previously may not have been a stakeholder? And then you've got the unknowns, right? The ambiguous, the unknown unknowns. You've got no precedents, you've got no playbook. So it's not enough to have a good system, a good process. You have to build a culture to prepare organizations to thrive. So to thrive, what that means is you need to stay 2 steps ahead. I think management is good at looking down the road, right? What's down the road? But how do you look around the corner as well? And this is where inclusion comes in. You have to be able to welcome and to synthesize difference in a very productive manner. And that makes the difference when you're operating in this VUCA world, from feeling really chaotic and really distressing to one that is actually full of potential and opportunity. Janet in the chat just now asked how to ensure that inclusivity is not just a token issue. And my argument is that whether you're in the public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector, inclusivity isn't about being polite or being fair or about creating opportunity for others. You need inclusivity to enable performance along today's metrics, but also keeping in mind the direction of travel for tomorrow. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ming. Dylan, would you like to jump in on that?
Yeah, so Ming has rightfully pointed out that the world that we're in is a constant state of what you call VUCA. And clearly there are advantages to organizations and people out there who are part of our talent workforce. She's made a point about how diverse opinions just allow us to be agile. And clearly anyone who understands diverse teams, and diverse teams is a starting point, but teams that allow for inclusion and welcoming that diversity, you allow different viewpoints and ideas. And I think that just helps you enable innovation, creative problem solving, and you just make better decisions. And there's a financial impact on organizations because we've seen research over time and time again that have pointed out that companies that are diverse, and more importantly, companies with diverse leadership, just outperform their peers financially. And here you can see, obviously, then therefore a diverse workforce and leadership just caters more strongly as an organization. And I like to think that you are also able to respond to your very diverse customer base. Because when we look at the customer base today, we're thinking internationally and not just sub-segments that we're used to. And if I were to speak to myself as a talent, if I see a company that is welcoming, that is diverse and inclusive, I'm likely to be attracted to this company. I probably would think highly of its reputation. And there's a level of attraction for me if I'm external or if I'm an existing employee. There's a sense of pride, right? And increasingly over a few spaces all around the world, there are also increasing regulations around protection, right? And making sure that the minorities are represented. So overall, if you look at it, there are just advantages for companies to do well in this area. And so today is no longer a strategic imperative, in my opinion. It's almost the fabric of how companies need to be. And I think it's almost every employee's right today to ensure that their workplaces are as diverse and exclusive as possible.
Thank you, Dylan. Now, who in the organization should take the lead in promoting inclusivity? Shoon?
Yeah. So very often people think that E&I and specifically inclusivity is HR's job, and they will point at the HR team as well as the chief HR officer or chief people officer. But given what Ming and Dylan have outlined around the complexity of the environment and the volatility, the potential impact, right? That isn't just about people, but also about the financial impact, the regulatory challenges, etc. It really sits with everyone in the organization, both in terms of the senior executive leadership team in setting the tone from the top. So it shouldn't just sit with the chief people officer. But more importantly, I think oftentimes I hear organizations and leaders talk about looking upwards at the chief executive officer, right, or the managing directors, and saying, okay, we need permission to do something around inclusivity. But really, when you think about what inclusivity is, it's the lived experience of every person in the organization, whether they feel included or not, which means that really everyone has a part to play in influencing that the person left and right of you in your workspace plays that role. You play that role as well. I know this may sound a little bit cheesy, but often I say that the word inclusivity starts with I, which also means it starts with everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Ming, would you like to jump in and follow up on that?
Sure. Thanks. I mean, Shoon mentioned that, it starts with the MD, it starts with the CEO, and I 100% agree with Shoon that it starts from the top. And let me offer that also boards have a part to play. And three ways that maybe an inclusive and a diverse board just is better at its job. The first is boards have a duty to shareholders to ensure long-term performance, right? And so that is about providing strategic oversight. And to be able to do that, a board must understand the market and operating context and how it is changing. So an inclusive mindset and a diverse board ensures that at board level, together with management, we are considering the changing operating context, diverse customer or stakeholder needs, different segments, and also perhaps be able to be a little bit more innovative to lead to more effective strategic initiatives. The second role of a board is risk management and ensuring compliance. Dylan already mentioned the compliance element, right? But for risk management, the very first step that we all know is you have to identify the risk first. You can't manage something if you haven't identified that it's an issue. So if you have an inclusive mindset that welcomes different perspectives to the table, you can identify a wider range of potential risks that may not be apparent if you have a very homogeneous viewpoint. Then once you've identified it, you have to assess, figure out how to mitigate. And then there's about trade-offs, right? What do we accept? How do we balance competing factors? For example, in the digital space, speed versus safety, right? And this really requires the understanding the impact to all stakeholders so that you don't have what they often call unintended consequences. And then last but not least, I think boards have a responsibility to hold executive leadership to account. They're not the CEO's boss in a way, but it's to work together to be accountable to the shareholders, to the employees. The board approves the performance metrics upon which the remuneration of the executives are based. So if you take, for example, if I tell the CEO, short-term financial metrics are your main KPI, then they'll be incentivized to deliver on that. And if the board defines holistic success in the short, medium, and long term, then they will support the executives in delivering and they will celebrate the achievements and also recognize the gaps, right? So if we want to start a culture of inclusion, integrity, and trust, then we have to role model that starting at the board level, right? It could be at the board level, it can be at the nomination committee level, the HR committee level, the risk committee level. You want to role model what you see in the organization. So Susan in the chat asked about how do you create the right culture? And, let me suggest that boards does have an indirect role to play. I'll very quickly give you some stats on Singapore, right? Government agencies are really setting the pace. We're more than 34% women on boards, right? This is a 10 percentage point increase from 5 or 6 years ago. Non-profit sector, not bad. We have about a third of women on the board. The private sector lags behind. The top 100 SGX companies by market cap has about a quarter, with 24% women on board. But it might sound really depressing, right? Because that means that three and four board members are guys, but it's a huge improvement from 10 years ago when it was less than 8%. So we're doing better slowly. My call to action is to ask shareholders to ask for balanced boards. All of us might own a stock here or a stock there. Shareholders to ask for balanced boards that reflects the markets that they're currently serving and that they want to serve, that reflects the workforce that they have today and the workforce that they want to develop for the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ming. It's good to know that it's improving, which is
It's
wonderful.
slowly.
Yeah, slowly but surely. Now, what steps can leaders within organizations take to ensure a more inclusive workforce? Perhaps Dylan, you'd like to take this one?
I'm happy to. So Ming has already spoken about how it starts at the top, and I think the board serves as a mirror to leadership. And if you think about leadership, you're essentially guiding a company through its strategies to achieve performance. And you derive performance through your people. And let's look at the basic components as to how we look at the people experience. I think it starts from how you look at an organization's way to attract folks. I've seen countless job ads that are sometimes tone deaf, where either language is not neutral or folks are really not focused on the actual competencies that are required. There's a lot of nice to have as opposed to must haves. And a personal bane of mine is when the actual process actually begins. Leaders have a right to actually ask, am I getting the right slate of CVs in? If you have somebody coming to you and saying, I have 10 CVs, and horribly 10 out of 10 are male CVs, any logical person should ask a question as to why. There is obviously a group that's underrepresented here. But for some people, that's a very difficult question to ask, even to begin with. And then let's look at the people who make decisions. So you obviously have a slate of people who are involved in the recruitment process. Ask if that slate of interviewers are diverse. And it's not just gender in this case as well. You may look at people with diverse experiences, because what you want to do is to evaluate if you're bringing the right person in with a diverse skill set that adds to the pool, as opposed to Ming's point, a homogeneous team where it's likely and perhaps a lot easier for you to bring in somebody that's very similar to what you already have. And these are difficult questions to ask. For me, I have a personal favorite where if you look at developmental opportunities or when I have succession conversations, I literally start the conversation by saying, let's count the number of women. And it's very telling, because if you talk about fair opportunities, and I think there are far more women in the world than there are men, and yet in terms of representation, you are getting something that's a lot different. It's an opportunity to not question, but to ask for clarification. Is there a reason why this is not reflective of what should be out there? I think there's some various tips and suggestions that everybody else can get involved in. Because if I look at the group of people today who have dialed in, a fair majority of them are folks who are at management level or in the leadership roles. And whilst you have that responsibility as part of a title, I dare say it's part of everyone's responsibility as an employee to be curious and ask questions. I think when you ask with curiosity, it oftentimes opens up a conversation. It may seem uncomfortable for some people, but I think rightfully said, the soft stuff, typically the hard stuff, right? And so I'll be curious. But I'll be curious to also hear about the response. There might be a reason why, but I think it opens a conversation and that allows, I think, us to make more effective decisions. So these are some tips that leaders can do. And that's just part of the employee experience if you chunk it up into how you attract, develop, and retain people.
Thanks, Dylan. Shoon, would you like to jump in on that?
Yeah, I would like to build on some of the points that Dylan mentioned, and also triggered for me because I just finished a couple of workshops with leaders, and there's a couple of things that are top of mind for me coming out of that. The first is that leaders need to be intentional and I would say hyper intentional, because whenever we are not intentional in including people, we are going to just unintentionally exclude somebody. That's the reality. So that's why I would say being hyper focused and hyper intentional on being inclusive is really, really important. And how do we do that? The first thing is just recognizing that many things we do is default habits, right? Or that we just, when we have a problem, there are some people that we normally just default to ask for ideas, or if we have a short-term challenge, we might just go straight to somebody to ask them if they can do the work, right? And cover and so on and so forth. So those are default habits that are very unintentional, but and may achieve your business results of getting to your outcomes that you need, but they do not allow you to really expand your experience of other people, to invite that difference in, which will then lead to other perspectives and ideas having an opportunity to show up in your organization. So I think that's one piece I would call out. The second is that it's not just about hiring more people who are different from you. It's actually recognizing that you need to have diversity in the organization, and probably a broader swath of kinds of diversity than just gender. If I can invite that, think about age, think about disability, think about neurodiversity, cultural and race, nationalities, etc., as much as possible. And then how to just very intentionally create a more inclusive workplace where that diversity of voices can play, right? Which comes back to that default that I was talking about. How do you go against your default of who you call into meetings? Who do you create and give development opportunities to? Sometimes maybe just taking one step back and thinking about the sort of people that you regularly go to, the people you promote, the people you talk about, the people you go to lunch with, right? And whether you are really intentionally mixing that up more as a leader. I think those really will go a long way to create a more inclusive workplace.
Thank you, Shoon. Now that we've heard from our panel and how organizations can be more inclusive, we do want to hear from you right now. So we do have a pop up on your screen, a quick poll that we're going to put up for you. So you can just make a little selection there right now. What type or types of diversity do you believe is or are crucial in fostering an inclusive workplace? It's a multiple choice. Is it gender diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, age diversity, cultural diversity, socioeconomical diversity, LGBTQ plus inclusion, ability and disability inclusion, neurodiversity, and religious and spiritual diversity? So have a quick look at this and make your selection, and we'll see what ranks top here. Meanwhile, as that is happening, if you do have any questions, you can actually put it in our Q&A as well, and we'll try to get to it towards the end of this session too. All right. Let's see what we've got here. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I think we're getting some questions in our chat as well. All right, here we are, closing the poll. Ranking top gender diversity, racial and ethnic diversity. We also got age diversity, cultural diversity at 70%, but top is gender diversity and racial and ethnic diversity. And as you can see, moving on, socioeconomic diversity at 48%, LGBTQ plus inclusion, 37%, and ability and disability inclusion at 57%. All right, so now we know where our audience lie. All right. Okay, thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Now let's move on to women in leadership. All right. And how can organizations create a more inclusive environment for women in leadership positions? Ming, would you like to start? Oh, do we have Ming there? That's okay. Perhaps
Sorry, I had when you're mouse hunting, you're trying to get your cursor. Mouse
I
hunting.
totally understand. All good.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think, first off, I just want to call out Jaden for a great question about whether or not inclusivity can become just an exercise in meeting quotas. And, the question is, what is the type of talent that the organization needs at all levels and in order to plan for succession, right? And for me, it starts with that organizations, whether you're private, a listed company, nonprofit, public sector, you need the best people in leadership positions to translate purpose to strategy, and then strategy to action. And, we've already said this several times. In order to do that, starting with purpose and strategy is that you cannot have groupthink, or you cannot have tunnel vision. And I often think about something our former president, Halima Yacob, once highlighted at an event by the Council for Board Diversity, where I'm a council member. And she mentioned that there were different types of diversity, like the poll just showed, right? And very broadly, we have inherent diversity. That's what we're born with. And that's what some of the top poll numbers were: your age, your gender. I mean, we can't choose when we're born or how old we are, right? Race, gender, and age. But then we also have acquired diversity, what we develop through life, right? Our knowledge, our experience, our networks, and who we know. And so this poll highlighted both types of diversity. And you actually need both types of diversity to bring different perspectives to the table, to be able to anticipate threats, anticipate risks, make decisions, and be innovative in problem solving. So how do we actually put this into practice, right? For leadership, it actually starts at every single level. This is my point of view, that every day at work, managers at all levels, whether you manage one person or you manage 1,000 people, right? There are two skill sets, two superpowers that we can develop and that we actually have the responsibility to develop. And that's speaking up and listening to input. Speaking up hones the skill of offering a different perspective. How do I speak up without being combative? How do we speak up, to actually contextualize our point of view to the whatever objective is at hand? The second, listening to input, is actually potentially for some people even harder, depending on where you sit on the kind of neurodiversity spectrum, right? The latter, which is listening to input, hones the skill of taking in divergent data points with respect, being able to synthesize them, and then inform decision making, and then make a decision. So these are the two skill sets that we can all develop, and that we, in a way, all have a responsibility to develop as a habit.
All right. Thank you, Ming. Dylan, would you like to get in on this?
For sure. I think for a start, the question was pointing around how can we make it better for women in leadership roles. Let's look at facts. So today, if I look at, say, the sector that I come from, which is consumer healthcare, bigger sector is obviously pharmaceuticals. If I look at the top 10 companies, 9 out of 10 are led by male CEOs. And I've also come from the beauty sector before. And whilst it's a sector that people would largely think would be a sector that would favor women to thrive, again, the same stats would point, if you look at the top 10 beauty companies, 9 out of 10 are led by men. Now, I don't have a point of view around it, but the numbers do inform you of one thing. There's another representation of women leaders. And so that's a good question to ask. And if we think about progression of women in an organization, typically, if you look at a fair workforce, I think entry-level workforce numbers, if you look across most sectors, you see balanced numbers. But from a career perspective, there are two levels where I start to see a fall through. So the first section is where we look at first-time women managers, and that's where proverbially we call it the first broken rung. More men get promoted into managerial roles as opposed to women. There's a reason why, something worth exploring, but there's also another phenomena where when you look at women stepping into a senior leadership role, that's where you also see numbers taper off. And upon discussions with a lot of women groups and my own experiences across a few organizations, there are a few reasons. Number one, I think societal roles and emphasis that it places on women responsibilities are unfairly disadvantaging women folks, right? If we think about it classically, who are typically homemakers, who looks after the home, etc., duties tend to unfairly fall onto women. And men do tend to get away with it. But if I were to look at, say, senior roles, women, and especially women who make life decisions to have children, they do take on an additional responsibility of being a parent, they go away and have maternity leave. And oftentimes there's a little bit of a myth that needs to be dispelled, because some people think that when women are away for maternity leave, there's time gone. And many managers I speak to think that it's a year gone, or at best a gap year, as to how they view it. Is it an opportunity for us to say, is it a gap year or is it a developmental year? Because as you become a parent, you also pick up really key human skill sets, which are so imperative and important in nurturing teams, fostering safe environments, etc. So beginning to question and reframe the way in which we create, I think, progressive moments in an organization will be ever so helpful. If I were to bring it back to perhaps progressive practices like are we better off not calling it maternity leave, but calling it parental leave, where if you encourage men folks in your organization to also participate in looking after children, then you sort of level out the playing field. So I think there's many opportunities for us to come in and look at how we can possibly enable women to thrive so that they have opportunities to step into leadership roles. And again, my basis is it's not about putting a woman into a leadership role. It's about making sure that we have fair, equal opportunities that are equitable for women to succeed.
So many good points there, Dylan. Thank you for that. Shoon, we want to hear from you as well.
Yeah. Um, I think Dylan brought up a really good point, right? About how sometimes the certain things in a company's, I would say, ways of working, right? Policies and processes, or even how things are called, may end up penalizing a group of people unfairly. And we need to be very aware of that. But it's not just as simple as changing uh, maternity leave to parental leave per se only, because if we think about then what reward or penalize in terms of behaviors that enable people to advance, switching the name is one thing, but then creating the environment that recognizes that then if men take that parental leave, they are also not going to get penalized, because otherwise then the view is, oh, um, when women have children, they are not committed, or what they have to take the maternity. But for men who then take the parental leave, they are less committed to the work, which is not true, right? But that's sometimes the unintended effect. So we do need to address the norms of how work is done and how work is recognized. And be very intentional to understand that there is not just a simple changing a label or changing the naming of something. Hard work actually is done to really question the norms and assumptions that we make. If I use golf as another interesting example, and I probably will be rubbing the wrong side of something. A lot of business is done on the golf course, and that's the way that things are done. And I'm doing that with inverted commas for those who can't see. But really, can we question that? And I'm not saying that golf is a bad thing. There are women who love to play golf too, but there are also men who don't want to play golf, who are young fathers who will find that they have a lot more priorities on the weekend, or maybe on the afternoons, picking up children. They want to shoulder the responsibility. So it's about, can we find that a way to have golf and other ways, right? And just recognizing and creating a more, I would say, expanded view of how work can be done, how work can be recognized and acknowledged, and also different skill sets, as what Dylan mentioned as well, that come from just people doing things differently. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shoon. All right. Let's do a poll right now. I do believe this is our final one here. Poll number 3. I would love to see what you feel about this. Again, it is a multiple choice. Does your organization have a current DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative? Options are yes, no, or unsure. So that should be pretty quick. At the end of the session, by the way, we will try to leave about 15 minutes for the questions. I do believe we're going to get to a few of them. So thank you very much for putting them in the Q&A as well. All right, just a couple more seconds. All right. Yes at 54%, unsure at 35%, no at 11%. All right. So it's clear that DEI initiatives are vital for fostering an inclusive environment. However, if there, isn't something in place at the workplace, I mean, what shall we do about it? Well, that kind of leads us to our next question. What are some strategies for building confidence, assertiveness, and leadership skills in the workplace? And what can individuals do to overcome barriers to excel in their professional journey? Ming, would you like to get us going with that?
Sure, thank you. Um, I'd like to kind of address that second question, which is what can we do to overcome barriers to excel, right? And if we take it from a very sort of individual perspective, with the advancements in medical and in well-being, most of us here who are tuning in today will live till we're 80, 90 years old, touch wood. And our children might live until they're 100 years old, right? And what that basically means is that we are going to have to change roles and change jobs and lead productive lives for a long time. It's not like our parents when maybe they retired at 60 or 65 or 70 years old and then look forward to a long retirement. If I can't imagine personally retiring for 30 years doing nothing, uh, so the point is that the skills needed for any job globally has changed by over 25% since 2015. What that means is that even if you stayed in your same role, I was a shop attendant, I was a server in a restaurant, I was a warehouse manager. The skills you need has changed over 25% already in the same job. And then when we have AI, the estimation is that this pace and scale of change is going to change, and the job transformation is going to be up by like 65% in the next 5 years. And then on top of that, we need skills that for industries we don't even know exist, right? Because the innovation will enable new industries and professions. So my kids asked me, Mom, what should I be when I grow up? And I said, I don't know. The most interesting jobs did not exist 5 years ago. And the most interesting jobs in 5 years don't exist today. So it's been estimated that 85% of jobs that we may see in 10 years' time today don't exist. So number one is about being open to learn and being agile and being really kind of hungry to accept new things. And this is where that mindset includes the inclusivity part. And then the building confidence, assertiveness, and leadership skills is role modeling that and not being afraid to not know. Don't be afraid to not know. Don't be afraid to ask. I always say I ask the dumbest questions in the room, but often there are lots of other people who want to answer want answers to the same questions. Confidence, assertiveness, leadership skills, those are the transferable skills, the human skills that Dylan talked about that we can develop as we grow. And then a last word I want to just say is not just about advancing ourselves. In my view, the ultimate value of these skills is why we grow as professionals in the first place. Because we might grow to advance ourselves, make sure that we're relevant in the workforce. But I think for most of us, it's to make a difference and to create a culture where we want to be in and where talent and effort are valued, right? At the end of the day, all of us are reaping the benefits of those who laid the groundwork before us. And so as much as we need to overcome the barriers in our own professional journeys, for me, I think about it as when I advocate for good decision making, I'm also advocating for others who might be younger or maybe facing greater challenges than myself. And then that actually lends, I think, great motivation to be able to develop these skills. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ming. I think we're just having a look at the time right now and see what we would like to do. I'm going to move on to women in STEM. All right. What are your observations on underrepresentation of women in certain sectors or fields? Dylan, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. And I think I've shared it earlier. Across the board, if you look at, say, your top 100 companies, there is clearly a factual view coming across, and clearly women are underrepresented. And we spoke about the various reasons possibly why. but definitely an opportunity for us to address some of those things. But I think what is key is understanding that the underrepresentation does have a business repercussion, right? Whenever you have an underrepresentation, and if you look at, say, even STEM or consumer healthcare or even pharma, there are just so many case studies out there that talked about how when there is an underrepresentation, diverse viewpoints are not addressed or factored into decision-making processes. And well, the minorities are the ones, or the underrepresented groups are the ones that are fairly disadvantaged. I mean, we can talk about this example over and over again, but there's a reason why when there was a space launch that did not go so well, when NASA went in and was introspective, is because it wasn't about just diverse folks not represented, that there wasn't even a safe and psychologically safe environment for people to speak up, right? So I think it addresses several layers for us to be able to talk about how representation is one thing, creating an environment for people to voice out opinions about whether misrepresentation or underrepresentation are things that we need to address. I think these are things that we can think about in addressing that underrepresentation. For me, I boil it back to one single business viewpoint. Everything that you do derives to one singular outcome as a company, is that you are meant to provide shareholder value, and that is termed as performance. And the best way for you to extract performance is in making sure that your workforce is best prepared to deliver on the performance, mitigate risks, and diverse workforces have over time and time again just outperform others. So there is that business case for it. I think what we need to address is potentially why we're still taking time, and it does incorporate a human factor to it, right? Biases are very human. We are human. Um, Case in point, when somebody comes to me with two CVs and somebody has a Harvard degree, not that I'm penalizing those that come from Harvard, a Harvard degree or somebody with a local degree, there is a natural preference. And for me, time and time again, when I turn up in front of, say, panels, or when I turn up for meetings, I do get asked about my age over and over again. And so these are natural human biases that I personally go through myself. And so it is a human condition. And so I don't want to go out into this webinar thinking that there's a factual, logical way of approaching it. But as long as we address that we are humans, and that is a very human aspect as to how we make informed decisions, it is also an opportunity for us to therefore address those human biases and make better decisions.
Thank you, Dylan. All right, I think we're gonna jump straight to some questions because I think we're running out of time, but we have some really good questions coming through on the Q&A. So we're gonna get to it right now. I'm just reading this off, right? It says here, thanks for mentioning LGBTQ, but how can companies in Singapore support their queer employees despite the lack of national or governmental support for the community? Not sure who wants to take this one.
Um,
I'm happy to take it, and maybe Dylan or Ming may wish to follow. I think first and foremost, right, we often look to the government or national policies to support. I would say that perhaps there might be some things that require that support because there could be a cost of doing so. Perhaps things like medical benefits, right? Or if you want to change your bathroom to from a or provide a non-gendered bathroom for the employees. That's one way to think about it. But really, when you think about how much some of these costs are, it's not overly prohibitive. And still, I want to acknowledge that for SMEs, that could be a challenge compared to MNCs. Having said all that, the one thing I would point out is there are also many things we can do to support queer employees that are cost-free. They are FOC, such as just sitting down with them and acknowledging them, right? Or asking a question about how they, what would they like as a support, and really finding out from them. And again, this is important, not just from an LGBT perspective. It's just not just not just LGBT, but other dimensions as well, because we often think about it as women need a certain kind of support, and we assume that, or people with disabilities need a certain kind of support, and we assume that. And therefore, the same with LGBT and queer employees, that they need a specific kind of support. We, to recognize that actually everyone is different and the kind of support that they need is very different. I'll just use one example to highlight what I mean. There was once when I was supporting an employee with visual impairment was joining my organization. My first thought is Braille, and we had to make everything, all surfaces that person's going to encounter with Braille, right? And when I finally sat down with the person and asked them, they basically said they don't read Braille because they became visually impaired at an adult age. So it's my lesson that I shouldn't be making assumptions and kind of flattening the person's identity, right? So asking questions and being open to hearing their answers is actually FOC. And I think that's the first step, actually. Dylan, do you want to add? Or me?
Sure. And yes, I'm perhaps potentially going to go on media and actually say it out loud. So I'm from the community, so I understand what it means, right? So number one, I think whether it's about the LGBTQ community or whichever underrepresented minority group that you belong to, and I think we all fall into one of those facets somehow or other. At least for the LGBTQ community, because it's not something that is outwardly visible sometimes, I think what a lot of people in the community tend to do is they tend to go out and look at visibly what are signals or signs that inform me as an individual whether it's safe. This could be sometimes symbols, policies, or things that you do, or even language, right? Or even things as to whether you have a regulated sort of environment in which people have to wear a certain uniform or a certain type of look, right? So these are various signs and signals that people look out to. I think what companies can do is to make it, like I said, equal opportunity. I think Shoon has given a couple of examples. What I'd like to reiterate is please do not jump to conclusion that the community, whether it is the queer community or anybody else, requires a certain type of intervention. I think let's not fall prey to that. I think what's always helpful is first create an environment where they feel comfortable enough to be able to speak about it out loud. And so that responsibility falls onto, I think, everybody in the organization to do so. But once you create a safe environment for people to talk about it, I think, please, let's be consumer-centric. Ask what will make a difference for the individual, for the community in this organization, and then address it accordingly. For some organizations, yes, it is non-gendered bathrooms. For others, I've been to organizations where they go like, nope, not a relevant solution, but can you please look at whether it's okay for me to bring my partner when you have company events, because you do just say, bring your other halves. And so what do you define by other halves? And so sometimes we use neutral language, but also leaves a shroud of gray for people to go, is it all right? I think it's easier if we say it's okay, it's all right. So psychologically safe environment, accessibility, and like I said, always ask what would work for you. We do that to our consumers and our customers, and we ask them what would you prefer. I think it just helps us if we take that same spirit in asking our employees, and especially those with employees that come from underrepresented minority groups, to say what would truly make an impact for them. And that's where I think we make a difference in the employee experience.
Thank you, Dylan. All right, we'll get to another question here. What impact does mentorship or leadership have on empowering women to pursue careers in male-dominated fields? Ming, would you like to take this one?
Sure. No, thank you for that question. I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you very much. Let me just take that up about the male-dominated fields, right? And I think this is an area where when we think about inclusion, we need inclusion at all levels, at the investor level, at the founder level, the business owner, management, all the way employees, and recognizing customers and stakeholders, right? Let me just take a point about, I think we had someone who asked about, Tammy, you asked about starting a business, right? We have, in 2023, I have US numbers, I don't have Singapore numbers, but no, actually, I have Southeast Asian numbers. So in 2023, the proportion of US venture funding that went to startups with at least one co-founder, one who was female, was over 25%. And this was like amazing, okay? In Southeast Asia, women-led startups receive less than 5% of tech funding. So then we think about that, where's the role model? Where's the mentorship, right? But if you dive into those stats, why did the US funding suddenly go up, right, to 25%? It was largely because most money went to a few deals that were AI companies. 2023 was when OpenAI raised a huge round, for example, so it could only skew the data. They raised 40% of all venture funding in the US for the same period. So what I want to just say that here is that new ground, new frontiers can be a good thing. And I just don't want to go all techie, right? Last month, I was reading about the Chinese wine industry. You guys may have seen that article in the Straits Times. And one of the wine experts observed how in China, the sector is so dominated, it's actually dominated by women, whereas in the more developed countries, the sector is very dominated by male figures because it's a traditional industry. And in China, wine is not a traditional industry, so it's a very safe sphere to open a company if you're a woman. So Tammy, if you're listening, if you're frustrated by established networks, try some uncharted territory. And if you are a founder, if you are a leader from any community which is underrepresented, then yes, do stand up and be that role model for others to follow in your footsteps.
Thank you so much, Ming. I think we're gonna pretty much try to wrap up, but thank you to our panel. My goodness, really, really very insightful this morning. I would love for each of you perhaps to share one key takeaway for our audience about fostering inclusion at the workplace. I don't know, Shoon, would you like to start?
Yeah, Jean, I'm happy to do that. And originally, what I was going to say, I said it a bit earlier, so I'm going to give a different one right now, which is to really think about how do you invite differences in, and start with perhaps looking at out for lunch with when you go to work, and invite somebody different, go for lunch with somebody different, so that you can understand them more. That would be my one takeaway to share with the audience.
Thank you so much, Shoon. What about Ming for you?
Thanks. I'll just sort of lean in to that point about being visible, right? There was this, there was this study, I can't remember, where they asked young kids in the United States to draw a picture of a scientist. And usually it was a guy in a lab coat, right, holding a test tube, maybe balding. So if you're balding, that's great. You fit the profile of a scientist. But then the same study asked kids in East Germany at that time. So I'm carbon dating myself, how old I am. I remember East Germany. And they said, draw a picture of an engineer. And the kids drew women, right? Because that was the society that was created. So the point is that context really does matter. And if people don't see role models, they can't visualize themselves in those roles. So it doesn't matter what community you are part of, right? Whether you're in the queer community, whether you're women, whether you're just, you're a person with disabilities, whatever, a minority race, whatever community you are in, or even as a citizen, be visible with purpose. I think Shoon talked about intentionality. Be visible with purpose, right? You bring value not because you fit in, but because you have a unique perspective and your authentic self actually brings value to the organization, as Dylan mentioned, right? You think about we talked about breaking barriers before, but you're breaking barriers to be able to break new ground for other people in your wake. Thank you.
Thank you, Ming. Dylan.
Thank you. I'm inspired by what Ming would have spoken about, which is about role modeling, and to an earlier point that she spoke, which is about it starts at the top with board of directors. I think if we are to take an introspective and reflective journey, we all have our own set of board of directors. They are the people that we look up to. These are your mentors and your sponsors. I would dare say, do a bit of a litmus test and do a bit of a check. Just think and visualize the group of people who are your personal board of directors. And maybe a first question to ask is, are they as diverse as they possibly can? And maybe that's the first step to think about how the people that we frame ourselves from are perhaps the very first step in which we can be a bit more curious and introspective. And maybe the journey starts from there. Because for me, I hold myself accountable to the fact that if they are my board of directors, they must challenge me and be as different as they can from me, because I wouldn't want to have another point of view that just echoes myself. That's just going to be an echo chamber, right? So an opportunity to look internally, and perhaps saying inclusion starts with an I, which is coming from Shoon, and the fact that we have a board or director perspective. So sort of weaving the two from Shoon and Ming. That's my takeaway for today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dylan. Thank you, Shun. Thank you, Ming. What a meaningful and fruitful session as well. I hope everyone who's watching today feels empowered, gathered some invaluable advice as well on how to advocate diversity and inclusivity. Do look out for the next Women in Business webinar on mid-career metamorphosis. It's happening on the 14th of November. I do want to say thank you everyone for coming on board to Executive Insights by Mediacorp. Once again, thank you to our panel, to Dylan, to Shun, to Ming for your sharing and all your advice as well. We hope to see you guys again very, very soon. Thank you so much.